When your mother tells you a story that happened to her during lockdown. For the most part of the lockdown, I was outside my country. This is an incident that happened to my parents during the lockdown phase. My mother narrated me this story when I returned home. This happened to me during lockdown, and it has shaken me from the inside. One fine morning, we were all sitting together and having our breakfast. Our dog, Pomp, was roaming around and wagging her tail. Mike had returned from his trip last night and he looked exhausted from the long journey. He had dark circles around his eyes and he looked fatigued. He is generally a very jolly fellow, always happy and full of pranks. But that day, he was unusually quieter. Whenever he came to the dinner table, Pomp used to run around excitedly, trying to play with him. But that morning when he came to the table, she suddenly stopped wagging her tail and started barking at my husband. I was surprised, as was Mike, but he did not say anything. After some time, he silently got up from the table and left. It felt weird. I wanted to ask him what happened, but probably thought it was just the exhaustion. The entire day, Mike did not talk to any of us. At night, we went to bed and fell asleep early. At around 3 a.m., Mike started to groan and made a kind of wheezing noise. Mike has asthma, so I thought it was his breathing trouble. I was getting up to get his inhaler when suddenly he jumped up and started crying like a baby. I asked him what had happened. At first, he was hesitant to tell me, telling me that I would not believe him. But when I insisted, he finally told me. Last night while at the hotel, I saw a face, changing its expression every second. At first, I thought it was just a shadow on the wall. I turned around to turn on the table lamp, but what I saw was not just a face, it was a monster. It started moving towards me, and on reaching me, he grabbed me by the neck and started choking me. I couldn't breathe. If I'm going to be honest, I did not believe him at first. I wanted to. I knew that he did see something, maybe nightmarish, but the idea of a monster seemed too far-fetched. Anyways, though startled, I calmed him down and put him to sleep. He insisted to keep the lights on, which was something he had never done before. The next morning, as I woke up, I could hear my dog barking outside. As Mike went downstairs with me to the table, I could still see Pomp continuously barking and growling at him, which was strange given how she generally is. I had to practically pull her away from Mike. The rest of the day went normal except for consistent barking by Pomp, but the nights were the same. Mike would wake up, frightened and crying. It had been 4 days since he returned. When nothing changed, I finally thought of visiting a shaman on the 5th day. He told me that my husband was haunted by an evil presence and it was trying to kill him. I was shocked. I could not believe that all of this was real. I asked him for help. He gave me a talisman and asked me to wrap it around Mike's wrist. The shaman also told me that if not contained, the spirit will kill him by the next full moon night, which was only 3 days away. I came home around 3 p.m. that day. Mike was home. He had taken a sick leave from the office. I quickly wrapped that talisman around his wrist and explained everything to him. He was relieved that I finally believed him. That night, Mike went to bed early. I was working in the kitchen when suddenly I heard a noise coming from our bedroom upstairs. I rushed up to see him wailing in pain, holding his throat. He had an open gash on his neck and it was bleeding profusely. The entire bed had become red with blood. I quickly dressed his wound, and when everything was under control, I asked him what had happened. He said that when he was lying on the bed, something grabbed his throat. I could not see who or what it was. I just felt a cold, stiff hand around my neck. It was the same feeling that I had that night in the hotel, except I could not see nothing this time. After some time, the hand let go of me, and it was then that I realized the blood flowing out of it. I tried to scream. I tried calling for your help, but I was not able to. But fortunately, it went off and you were able to hear me. I looked up at his wrist and saw that the talisman was missing. I asked him where he put it, and he looked visibly surprised. What do you mean? Don't you remember? You came to my room and asked me to open it and sprinkle some water on it, Mike said. I was terrified at this point. I could not tell him it was not me, but someone else who came to him, taking my form, and asked him to do it. I asked Mike to go and word the talisman back as soon as possible. He listened to me. Soon we fell asleep and nothing happened after that. On the day of the full moon, I was anxiously waiting for something to happen. I remained awake all night and made sure that the talisman stayed where it was supposed to stay. Thankfully, the nights went uneventful after that. It has been 4 months since then. He's doing just fine. I think it is important that you know that we may not believe in other creatures, but they do exist. Some stories are not just stories. I imagined he was going to kill us. When I was about 10 years old, my mom had her second kid. We didn't have a ton of money, so it wasn't uncommon for our cars to break down or need to be repaired. Well, one day, my mom, my babysitter, and I were heading to my aunt's house. She lived kinda up in the mountains, so to get there, we had to take a pretty steep inclined highway. Then it veered off into the more rural area where my aunt lived. About halfway up the incline, my mom's car started to sputter. We could feel the car giving out, and I remember my mom just trying to get the car as close to the exit as possible. Well, the car didn't make it, and we broke down on the side of the highway. This was before cell phones were popular, so the only way to get help was to walk to the nearest payphone. We were probably about a half a mile or so away from the exit, and right off that exit was a gas station. My mom told me to get as close to the guardrail as possible, and we began walking. Within a few moments, a man pulled up beside us and asked if we needed a ride. My mom cradled my sister, shoved me to the side, and quickly said no to the man. She did that hip bump thing that people do, and at first I was like, what the heck? Because if I would have fallen over the rail, I would have tumbled down a pretty steep hill. But then I looked over and very clearly saw a gun on the man's front seat. It was half covered with a handkerchief, but it was clearly a small handgun. He pulled it closer to him and tried to fully conceal it, but both I and my mom had already seen it. He drove slowly beside us, trying to convince my mom to get in the car, but my mom just kept saying no. But she wasn't rude or mean about it, calm as a clam, just friendly as could be. He finally pulled off as we got closer to the exit. I'm guessing he wanted to stay on the highway. Once he pulled off, my mom looked at me and said he was going to kill us, yet she was still eerily calm. Creepy guy and his wife at Target. This happened when I was about 12 or 13 years old. I went to look at the books on the other side of the store by myself while my parents were shopping. When I was there, I noticed some guy that was about 5 feet away from me. I didn't really pay any attention to him and just went to the other side of the shelf, but he also went to the other side when I did. I was a little uncomfortable, but I thought it was just a coincidence, so I went back to the other side. Again, when I went to the other side, so did he. He started getting closer and closer, which was making me a little more freaked out, and he still followed me every time I would go to the other side. At this point, we were just circling the shelf, so when he was still walking to the other side, I went into the DVD section that was next to the shelf. I saw him look around, and then a woman, who I assume is his wife, appeared next to him, and he whispered something to her, and they both started looking around. I was kind of shaking because I knew they were looking for me. Fortunately, my parents came just in time, and when we were leaving, I saw them again glaring at me.